Thank you very much for coming. I'm here to introduce what will be a conversation between Alexandra Hughes, who's the artist responsible for the work currently in the building, and Karen McQuaid. My name's Charles Danby. I've been an invited curator at the studios here and I've run around about 4 projects over the last couple of years. And I always look for interesting things and interesting artists to bring into the context of this quite unique building, which has a function through dance, but it has a very public utility, so a lot of people pass through this space. And so hopefully some of the things that I look for in terms of inviting artists will become apparent through the conversation that Karen and Alexandra have tonight. To briefly introduce, Alex graduated from the Slade in 2008, and prior to that she was at Falmouth College of Art. Her practice is primarily based in photography, but that also includes looking at the moving image as well as the still image, so that's something that will be talked about, I'm sure. Karen McQuaid, who is here, it's very nice to have her, and it's good for her to do this conversation. She's the program organizer at the Photographers Gallery, which is the leading photography gallery in London. She's been there for almost 5 years and has recently worked on the Jim Goldberg exhibition. And one thing that Karen's done over that period is she set up a graduate exhibition, which is now an annual event called Fresh Faced and Wild-Eyed. And that's actually how Karen first came in contact with Alexandra's work, which was shown there. So the talk, as far as I understand it, is going to follow three passages. One is Alexandra and Karen are going to talk about, give a kind of background into Alex's practice a little bit further, and identify some key works which inform what's here. The second part will be a conversation based on the work that Alex has done here, and then the third part will be questions. So that will be an open discussion that can be generated. If I'm looking at some of the things that I anticipate Karen and Alex will talk about, one of the key things would be an idea of potential, potential in terms of movement, an idea of movement within a still image or stillness within a moving image. And even the name that the show comes under, which is arrangements, in some way informs that idea of something not being fully settled or the potential for something to change. And within that, an idea of transformation, so light transforming across surfaces. The other key components of Alexandra's work are light, time, and interestingly for me, which I'm hoping is going to be talked about, are ideas of color which come out of light. So the fact of light cast upon a white wall, when that's analyzed and photographed and recast, the color shifts within that become apparent. So almost imperceptible things that Alex somehow manages to make perceptible. So that's a few of the things that hopefully will unfold, and I will hand over to Alex and Karen.
Well, you're all very welcome. Thank you, and it is very informal here, so if for any reason you can't hear, please do just let us know. I mean, perhaps as we're surrounded beautifully in a way by some works, I don't know, would you like to start with either?
Okay.
And introduce what's around us?
Okay, so the slide projector this way, that is 14 hours of a white wall, photographed almost, I think, every 10 minutes for 14 hours. The white wall is here in the studios, it's downstairs, and this was shown on the opening night of this show.
And that's a model that you've used on other white walls?
That's right, this is one of 3. So I did this at the Stanley Picker Gallery last summer. That was 17 hours. It depends on the sunrise and the sunset to the duration. So it was summer, so it was 17 last. The And then the first one I made was 13 hours. That was in the winter,
Mm-hmm.
and that was in my room at home.
And is there any indication in the full titles of what period they cover, or?
Yeah,
Yeah.
So they're named. So this is
Yeah,
14 hours,
14, exactly.
13,
Yeah.
17. Yeah.
So you do get a sense. Have you ever thought about bringing the three together in any way?
Yeah, I think I would at some point, and it's not, I'm still I kind of like this idea of it sort of collecting further,
Mm-hmm.
having this expanding sort of archive of white walls. Yeah.
And white space comes in here in a bolder way, perhaps.
Yeah, this is a slide projection. This is one of a series that I made a couple of years back now, my first year at the Slade, where I have punched a circle out of the surface of the slide and then projected it. And this is one of a larger series.
And that they're obviously this work to our left was made specifically in this space that has public movement, and again this is it's a representational space, and it's a public space, and also a lot of other works that we will see are made in more domestic spaces, and that's perhaps another thing to think about while looking through your work, I suppose, are where are the signs of those domestic interiors as opposed to more public spaces, when you do reduce often the spaces to particular corners or particular surfaces, and yet sometimes you get the sense that something is a home and something is more public.
Yeah, I think it depends what I'm looking at or looking for in some respect. With the slides, it was sort of capturing of where there's a projection present in some way, so a shadow, or there's a cast of light. So that kind of exists everywhere, in any space. And then perhaps where there's a quieter movement occurring that I'm trying to capture, that is more likely to come from a sort of more domestic space, simply because it's a subtler thing to notice, so it's more likely to be in a space that I know very well.
And that you are also perhaps in a different pace. When you're in the public sphere, your movement is quite often more directional. You're going somewhere, you're passing through, you have something to do, and in the spaces that you depict in lots of other of your projects, you are automatically, hopefully, your shoulders are a little bit looser. You're a little bit more receptive to these changes going on around you.
Yes.
But I think cumulatively, as we do look at more works, I think that's one thing that comes through very strongly in your work, is that regardless of where these spaces are, whether they're in the public sphere or whether they're in the same wall that you come back to again and again, the same action is happening. Light is moving, and that's
absolutely, that doesn't change. That interest or that wanting to capture, it can be anywhere. That the light, the transformation of light through time in any space.
And that fascination we'll definitely talk more about later on, but perhaps that's a good time to introduce the video piece.
Okay. This video piece is called The End of August. It's just a 2-minute extract. There is actually sound, but it's okay.
And could you maybe introduce when you began to consider ideas of working not just with a still camera? Was that something that's always?
No, it hasn't always been there. Photography, very sort of straight photography, still photography, was the sort of route to my practice. The moving image, working with video and moving image, has really just come about in the last couple of years, actually, whilst finishing my MA. the moving image started to occur.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes. And did you want to talk about instant Polaroid? Do we want to switch?
Yeah.
This is the body of work where I came to know Alex's work first. And I don't know if you want to explain the
Yes.
process a little.
Yeah. So these were shown in very sort of really enlarged prints. In fact, I can whip through and then I come back. So they're around this size. But what they come from is originally it starts by me photographing with an instant Polaroid, one of those Polaroids that develops in front of you, videoing the development from start to finish, which is a separate video piece that I actually have, which is the Polaroid developing. And then this came about by freezing video stills of that development and then enlarging them into another piece of work.
And I think importantly as well, in the titling, you're given the exact point at the it's 3 seconds, 20 point, I can't quite remember exactly, but you're given that indication of how far into that development process it is. So that bit of information, because they are quite confusing images to begin with, because there's a hint of digital information. You're quite aware that there's been a stage between.
Yeah, it was really about sort of this process of different technologies, and to sort of create totally sort of take it from a source and transform it into a different image entirely. So it was about these steps and how far I could go with those in some way. Yeah.
I think perhaps, hopefully everyone here has spent a little bit of time downstairs, if not just this evening at another point in time. And I think arrangements itself is a very clear, not a distillation in any way, but almost everything that we could open up these images to discuss is evidenced at some point in what's on the floors below us. So if perhaps we could maybe move on and start to talk about this particular about arrangements particularly, then I think naturally we'll probably go through everything that we could begin with these images.
Yeah. Yeah.
So would you like to talk about your first reactions to the space, your initial?
Yeah. Well, straight away, for me, of course, it's the light that I sort of react to first, and the architecture of this building. There's so much light that comes through. There's so much glass, and in fact, all sides of the building have windows and glass. So I was very aware of the pattern of the light rotating through the building, and I've been sort of looking at or thinking about sundials quite a bit, and how it is marking time through through that rotation of light, and so those were that was the initial response.
And were you, essentially, open brief is the word, but were you were very free to have the types of outcomes that you felt fit? You knew that there would be an exhibition period, just kind of.
That was my one. I had a deadline.
Yeah.
That was it.
One thing I think, certainly with this behind us, and with looking at Polaroids in this space that are presented, one-to-one and as the Polaroid itself, I think you're interested in cameras, in the light that goes through the camera itself, as well as the light that goes through a stunningly designed building like this. And I know that you and I have discussed, I know that you work with teenagers, and we've joked in the past about that moment where young people now will take an image on an analog camera and they'll turn it round, or they'll look to plug it in, and I'm just wondering how much that kind of the camera and the analog process itself and all of its kind of capabilities and possibilities are so much a part of your work. I'm wondering, how important is it for you that an audience, that a viewer, have some basic knowledge of that, because that's obviously changing in a way.
Yeah. I guess it's important for me. It feels like I want people to know that it's an analog process that I'm working in some way. Though I don't know whether it's important that someone comes to the image with a photographic knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's sort of slightly contradicting that, but and hopefully, something can be taken from it, whether there's photographic knowledge or not. But yes, I think because there is so much about the analog camera and the pushing of the camera and its limitations as well. Like it's like, how far can I go with this, or the material itself. And yeah, so in that sense, it is important that it is recognized as an analog process.
And can you remember, just back in a sense in relation to cameras themselves, and that idea of the thing itself being essentially a box that light passes through. Can you remember the first time that you got very excited about that, the abilities of the camera, or even understood it, really?
I think what it was when, for me, using the camera and using photography, it was what really kind of captured me about it was that it had to come from the external, like, environment. It had to come from what is physically present, which is probably where maybe this time element becomes quite important as well. It is what has occurred, like it has occurred in front of the lens in some way. So that is probably where it started, that idea that I can make, it's making an image, and it can be any sort, it's sort of pushing what is physically present and captured, what happens when I capture that, what sort of transformation occurs in that, and then how can I then further get what process can I then take that to as well.
And it's very interesting that your practice seems to have very essential elements, and light certainly being one of them. I mean, perhaps for me, one of the most illustrative, and not to use that in a bad term, works is End of August, is that video piece that we saw a moment ago, of light moving across that wall. That to me is a very, very visual indication of an interest in light and an interest in time, and hopefully people are a little bit familiar with the works. And I came here this evening a little bit early just to spend another little bit of time with the works, and I stood in the works that are directly outside the studio, kind of below us. I think there's 3 Polaroids and 1. And I was standing in front of the works and looking at the images, and the sun obviously came out from behind a cloud, but very quickly and very suddenly what I was looking at was flooded with light. And I couldn't see the Polaroids anymore. I could see a very highly contrasted, quite definite reproduction of the stairs and that particular mesh and those beautiful almost Bauhaus railings from behind me. And the image was completely imprinted on what you had done on the perspex, and then it was gone again, as quick as that, and that idea that the light that you were working with and the temporality of that, and the almost in obviously cameras and photography since the beginning have been about fixing that moment and that point. But I don't know if you could talk about some of your frustrations with working in light, because to me that was a perfect illustration of how difficult it is to do so much of what you do, because it was there and then it was gone.
Yeah, well, yes and no, because in one way there shouldn't be any frustration, because there is always a quality of light, whether it's a glorious sunny day or a very cloudy day. There is always a shade of light, and therefore a shade, and color, as we were sort of mentioned earlier. So in one respect, it doesn't really matter, as long as it's that capturing of those various forms of light in some way. But then, I mean, yes, there was a couple of weeks of very cloudy weather, and I was praying for some sun, just for the shadows that occur, and it is those movements of shadow that do really, really get me. So,
and I mean, maybe for you to just share a little bit of your process of working through this commission, and the time you spent here, and how you intended that to be, and whether it kind of matched up to what you wanted it to be.
Yeah. Well, with the Polaroids, sort of as I was saying, when you enter the space, and you can be up at the top of the stairs, and you kind of can see down, or so there's all these levels that you can kind of see into at one point almost, or you're aware of the light hitting one wall, and I'm kind of thinking, what's the light doing up on the other wall? And it was wanting to somehow bring these components from various sides of the building together, to sit together in some way. So with the Polaroids, I was masking areas to allow then to have these two exposures sitting on one photographic surface. And so that was that way of bringing those elements together.
And did that resolve itself early on as something that you wanted to do? I mean, I'm also just thinking, I suppose, about how you spent time. I mean, how perceptive, and how kind of allowing for the space to, in a way, tell you how you wanted to work, or did you have quite set ideas? Because I know that you spent a lot of time here, and a lot of and how you filled that in a way.
I didn't have very, very set ideas. I wanted to come here, and I had actually, I've got an image. I should show it. This collage piece I made. I made this just before starting the work here at the Siobhan Davies, and this was very much in my mind. And I suppose this could almost be the starting point to the works that are here. And this is called a diagram, and it is describing something. It's almost a mapping of something that I was doing. So this really fed into the work. This is obviously two images together, and again, talking about the Polaroid, and actually also those on the table. It was then thinking, well, how can I have that onto one surface, where there's this sort of repetition, or this meeting of different times together onto one photographic surface in some way.
And you did make a collage at the beginning, which didn't...
I did make a collage, yes, but I quickly moved into... I've sort of found myself wanting one surface to share different environments and different times.
And the ways that you found to deal with that have led to the work that we see. One thing that I noted straight away, and it is very difficult to respond in a way to a building that is. I mean, it's impressive as well as how sensitive and beautiful this building is. It's also very impressive in itself. And one thing that I kind of admire you for and applaud you for is the restraint that you've shown in scale, in a way. And I know that scale is something that we did want to discuss as well. When I first saw Alex's work, unfortunately for you, it was on a screen. It was an online submission. So it was on a screen. I had the dimensions of the work as well as that small representation, but there's no amount of imagining something up in scale. You can have a visual representation on a screen, and you can know the exact dimensions that image should or does in actuality fill, but there's something that's lost. You can't imagine it to its proper kind of fulfillment. And then seeing those works that you showed at the gallery, and they were very, very impressive in their scale. They're very impressive prints. They were very sumptuous things. They're very curious things. And I think to walk into a space as this is, which is very impressive in its own right, and also has a lot of expanse to it, and to have the confidence to not make large prints and not fill that expanse, and the confidence and the Polaroids then become these almost jewel-like things. And I think that I'm wondering, was there any dilemma in that for you, or from the offset did you know that you wanted people to have a more intimate relationship with the images?
I think almost the mediums I picked sort of dictated the scale in some respect. Polaroid is, fairly small format. Yeah, and I think I think I did decide to sort of go small because the whole building, though it is large, it's made up of so many sort of components, and there's so many various little very textures and surfaces, and the architecture itself has got so many different elements to it. And maybe by having these smaller pieces of work, you start to feel this sort of collection, sort of which might sort of reflect on the the components within the building and the architecture.
I mean, I think components is a very interesting word, and I think when you stand at the above the table piece or table selection downstairs, there's a particular kind of, there's a very, you accept and look at works that are on a table in a much, I mean, it's got museological kind of connotations, and you look down almost in a more relaxed way sometimes than you confront an image, I think. And there is, for me, there's a wonderful moment in looking at that table where you concentrate on the repetition, and you concentrate on the movement within them, and the rotation and all of those things, and there's a lot of interest on that table, and then suddenly your visual plane expands, and you start to recognize the surfaces. And it's one point in the building where you can be looking directly down at a table, and then suddenly your focus plane just shifts a little, and then all of these surfaces that are directly around you that you haven't paid attention to, you start to recognize in the images. And it's for me, that's one of the strengths of that work, is that shifting time. And I know we want to talk about transformation in a way, but that key moment for looking at that work is when I start to recognize the surfaces that are represented in the images. And that's surely, I think, one of the luxuries of this building is the range and sheer amount of different and interesting and well kept and visually exciting surfaces.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's such a wonderful that your work is a wonderful inclusion here, and that Charlie was obviously very perceptive to see that those things would have so much mileage for someone who works as sensitively with surfaces as you do.
Yeah, there was so much to it. It was it was kind of wanting to pull those elements without hopefully sort of exhausting them in some way. But there was so much to be aware of, and to notice and to capture.
And I think maybe staying on those works for a second, that idea of kind of rotation and continuation within your practice, I get a sense with those works that process could be carried on, beyond this space and beyond it could be not rolled out again and again, but there's something in those rotations and in those layerings on top of each other, that it could almost go on forever. And I'm wondering if I could maybe ask you a little bit about completion or kind of resolution for you. And because things like your Polaroid, that I know that you have projects that you keep going
are
at.
ongoing, yes.
Yeah.
I do have an ongoing Pearloid project. And yeah, this sort of, so you're saying about my decision to when something's complete, or
when that phase of kind of feeling that something is resolved or has come to a.
Well, it's not very sort of not a conscious sort of decision. Obviously, with this, there was an end point in mind, but generally speaking, with my practice, things overlap a lot. A piece of work can be complete in one way, and I know when that is complete, but the actual ideas or to where that project begins and ends, it's sort of a natural decision point without, I don't really put any restriction on it at that, if that makes
sense. So it's more fluid than that.
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've talked about video and end of August a little bit, but and I know that Charlie briefly introduced this idea, but for me, one of the most exciting and kind of absolute elements in your work is the idea that, as you said, that in the still images there is so much potential for movement, and I know you mentioned briefly sundials earlier on, and I don't know, is it for me it's almost as simple as that. A shadow at a particular angle on a wall, for me, has so many. I think it's the visual connotation, almost with the sundial, but you already imagine it into the rest of the movement, and you're looking at a still image of something as simple as light and shadow on a wall, but somehow in that image is implied that shadow was previously lower down, and that after the moment of the photograph it will be farther on. And that sense of movement being so present in your still work. Could you talk about that a little bit, or how?
Yeah, I think movement.
You perceive it.
Yeah, the movement is the key. Movement and rhythm, even. Maybe with the video that I showed, with the shadow that appears and then disappears, I get this. I'm sort of aware of this rhythm of change, or the light with an object, and so it's really about capturing the sort of constant flux of things and the patterns that occur in the environment, or the movements or the changes that are occurring all the time. I'm very aware of that, and that's absolutely key to what I'm sort of looking at, is that constant change and movement.
I think you said to me once that one of your tutors referred to your work as moving stills, and I think that's a wonderful way of beginning to think about it.
Yeah, and I think it can be applied quite a lot to the way I make videos as well, the moving still, because though it's moving, I feel like I'm treating the video very much like I would a still photograph. If I have a series of shots, video shots, it's most likely to be a still set frame at every point, where something happens within that frame, rather than being this continual sort of shift in perspective. Or
I mean, I think that's really important. I think that when you do look at your video work and you're aware that the camera is stationary, and often the movement of light is quite jerky and certainly very slow and very minimalist, so that although video is being used, it's not registering much movement at all, or certainly it's registering a very simple, straight, slow movement. in a way, I think about your videos as animated photographs, and I think of your photographs as moving stills, and for me there's that's a lovely parallel, and it's a lovely opposition to have in the work, and I think it's certainly one of the strengths of it.
Yeah, thank you. with the Polaroids I made downstairs, there was a lot of movement in the actual process as well. I was making these masks which just allow one slice to, like a window, to be exposed, and I was actually rotating that or flipping it, and so the process included a lot of this sort of ideas of movement, or sort of what's the word, circular sort of motions.
And diagram is behind us here, and I don't know if you're familiar with the image from the show that became kind of the lead image in a way, that's with the red disc, but I don't know if you'd like, because we haven't really talked about your own hand coming between the light, and I don't know if you'd like to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, that image that you're talking about, that was one of the first that I made when making work here, and that came from the initial ideas of wanting to block parts of the surface and then exposing later. And I started by using these coloured discs, like stickers essentially, to use, never accounting for the colour of the sticker, in fact, to become present. And it was a great surprise to have this red appear. And that then sort of set the rest in motion, really. Yeah,
because there is, and we obviously have it here on my right as well, there is an essential difference to some of your work that records, that purely records, if that's a term to be used, and then there are these maybe satellite, or maybe perhaps they're less in number, but no less in interest, I think, where you do put yourself in some way, you insert yourself, and you play or change or obstruct or allow for the light.
Yeah.
But there seems to also, it's not that they're jarring, it's not that they're two, different boxes of your practice,
no.
but there is something different about when you get involved in a way.
Yeah, I think, and again, it goes back to, it's just the material and the surface. It's the surface of the film, or in the case of the Polaroid, it's the light sense. It's playing with that idea of obscuring light, or then allowing light at those different points. It's having that control, and to then play with that sort of layering of images in that, and it's just like playing with the camera. It's
fun.
What I like to do. Yeah.
We touched on transformation, but we didn't go too far into it. And for me, one of I met you the day that I saw the show first, and one of the most kind of instantly gratifying, but not therefore less interesting, but one of the first things that struck me was how much I enjoyed the shift in focus in the Polaroids, how much at one kind of distance or at one focus my eyes were looking at shapes. They were looking at forms in monochrome, forms of darker colours against lighter colours, and I was looking very formally at the shapes, and they were not necessarily representational, and they were abstracted from my own perception of them. And then my focus or my distance or both would shift, and then I wasn't just located by recognizing what the thing in the Polaroid was. There was another layer on top of that, because I was located because I could see that what I thought was a shape was an object, was the edge of a stairs, or was a banister, or was an actual thing, but it was a thing that I had passed in the last 2 or 3 minutes. It was a thing that was directly around me. So there's for me that transformation from shape to thing that I can recognize to thing that I can maybe see if I just turn my head a little bit was a lovely process and a very rewarding process to kind of to visually take the work in. And I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about transformation when you're looking to take photographs and then when you're dealing with them afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, the contact sheets that are downstairs of the frosted glass, and actually with this white wall piece as well, I knew that the camera would pick up something that my eye, without really training it, would miss in some respect. It would be like, for instance, with the white wall, or actually with the frosted glass, it appears white. But in the photographing, the subtleties of colour become apparent. So, yes, the transformation that occurs through the photography or through the camera is definitely, it's something that's very much part of my practice.
And what the naked eye can't, or
yeah, again, it's using the camera to sort of slow down, perhaps, or allow to see something differently, or to see it in more detail. In that way, it sort of quietens it, perhaps, or it just focuses on something very particular, pulled out of the physical environment that you're in.
Could we talk perhaps a little bit about the Polaroid itself? Artists like Cy Twombly, or filmmakers like Tarkovsky, or photographers like Walker, I mean, people are fascinated and have a continued fascination through very, very long lives of making images with the Polaroid. And we're obviously at a particular point in history now. There was the excitement a little while ago of everybody being convinced they would never be able to get their hands on it again, and now the Impossible project have restarted making, and there's all of this not baggage, but there's all of this association with Polaroids themselves, and they are quite nostalgic, often quite nostalgic. It's quite often a nostalgic medium choice to make. It's never that way with you. So I don't know if you could talk about your fascination with the Polaroid or itself.
Yeah, I mean, I love Polaroid. I think there is something for me that the reason I use it so much is for its sort of instant result, if you like, or doesn't sound so good, but the fact that it sort of appears immediately in front of me. Again, it's that sense of seeing something develop, which is why I use it a lot. Also, it does seem to, depending on obviously the type of Polaroid you buy, but it does seem to hold on to light, the qualities of light in a very strong way. It's the qualities that it allows to come present.
It contains in itself, it contains that light, but it also contains that implication of time, because we're all familiar with the Polaroid, and we're all familiar with the process. So, and I mean, you talk about development. I mean, a Polaroid has no more special relationship to time in actuality. It's just that it's time that we see. It's immediate time. It's time that we see and we can have straight away.
Yeah, and it's like I can take that photograph and have it develop there, and then I've got this direct contrast to where I am to then what I have in my hand.
It's kind of a mean question, and I've never asked you it before, I don't know, do you ever think that you'll resolve your interest, or that you'll exhaust your interest in light and time and the camera in that kind of triangle?
I don't think so. I don't. It seems so much time has passed and the interest doesn't waver. Obviously, other things might become present in the work, but I mean, even on the most sort of basic level, if I remain working with photography, then essentially light and time will, in that very simple manner, will always be present. But I can't, it seems like I almost have an obsession or something, like the amount of images and photographs that I am taking the whole time of various moments of light and shadow and light and object. It would imply that it probably won't ever be stopped.
And that one wall that I mean, you make works on all surfaces, but there is one very, very often recurring wall in your work. Is that a bedroom, or is it a kitchen, or is it
it's a little office space in my house.
Okay.
And without actually being aware of how much I was photographing it, I realized it appears again and again and again. It appears here in the image that's projected. It's again in the video. It's on many of my Polaroids. It's again sort of unconsciously returning to something. And
I don't want you to have to move now for any particular reason. I want you to be able to continue that with that particular wall as well as with the particular interest.
But I think I was aware that this was happening, particularly in my home, these spaces I was returning to and enjoying just seeing these simple changes or drastic changes. And I really wanted to have that sort of feeling here when I came here. I sort of was very aware that I needed to feel in some way at home. I needed to spend a lot of time here to really start to see these to see where these subtleties or where these moments occurred, into what I could then start to investigate. So I spent a lot of time down here, just, from day to the evening, just trying to really feel like I was aware of everything that was that was going on in this building. Like
maximum observation in a way, having seen and decided with full knowledge of the space and the light.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's anything that you think that we haven't talked about before we throw it out, or
no, I'm happy for
open it up again. We've talked a lot. I don't know. Are there questions from Charlie or from anyone here, or comments? We're actually recording this. It's not for projection that you have to wait for the mic, but it's just so that the questions get recorded as well as everything else. Thank you.
When you choose to launch into a venture, do you a conscious choice of your media before you start? Do you choose Polaroid or film or digital, or do you try all of them out first and then decide which one gives you the depth or the level that you're looking for?
Well, there isn't a massive amount of, there is a little bit of trying out, but it seems to happen kind of, again, naturally in some way.
You instinctively know what you think is the best for what you're going to venture into?
I think so. I think the idea really dictates what medium that is in some way. So if I'm looking at a sort of instant moment of light hitting a photosensitive surface where I want these two things to be occurring straight away, like that's obviously Polaroid, or if I want to sort of have this reprojection of color, then it would be slide that would be most suited to that. So it's the idea, it's what I want to investigate comes first, and then the most suited medium, I think, then comes with that.
And what's going to happen when Polaroid is gone, or is it still available?
I'm not sure it's going to ever. I really hope it doesn't totally go. There seems to be enough people still working with it that it shouldn't. And there's a new organisation now called the Impossible Project, and they're campaigning really to keep Polaroid alive. So hopefully there's enough of us that we can keep it, and if not, then I don't know. How to become a millionaire and keep it going myself.
You're safe for the time being, anyway.
I am safe.
I'll
cross that bridge when it comes to it, I think, is the answer. I'm not sure.
I think, Karen, maybe I heard you talk that you, Alex, had worked with children.
Yes.
Can you talk a little about the projects and how you've helped youth with photography and what it entailed?
Yeah, I'm running a after-school photography club with teenagers. I just go in for one evening a week, and it's really just sort of introducing to them other cameras other than. I mean, most of them have mobile phones and cameras on that, and a few have the sort of little snapshot cameras. But really, it's just sort of giving them more background onto photography generally. I went in there with my medium format camera with a Polaroid back, and as we were saying, they're still looking for this image on the back, this digital screen. And I've been doing a portrait project. They've been photographing people from the community, so they're learning how to have this role as a photographer and being able to take control and instruct and interact through the camera in some respects. So,
I mean, it's such a rare thing that people of that age now have access. You know, that's a real luxury to have you coming in with a medium format and having that access is really fantastic, because it's less and less.
Looking at the kind of the images and the photographs that are kind of exhibited, to me it kind of seems like architecture is kind of a really, really significant factor, almost kind of on the same level as light and time that you keep going back to.
Yeah.
Because it kind of, for me, it feels like you kind of almost need architecture or spaces to kind of create your almost like compositions, if you like.
Yeah.
Is that something that's kind of...
Yeah, I guess, inevitably I need surfaces to look at and to see how light is then played out across a certain place. Then architecture then becomes very key, particularly the way shadows are formed. That's entirely because of the architecture. If the light's coming through a window and it hits something, that is commenting on the structure, on the architecture.
No, it's quite interesting because, sometimes it's kind of the space that you're around manipulates the light, and other cases it's you that's kind of manipulating, kind of the light. And I just thought, because, you're talking about light and time being a significant factor in your work, I think actually, architecture or the space itself is probably one of the top important thing in your work.
Yeah.
That that allows you to create those kind of beautiful, almost they are quite romantic images, I think, as well. So
Yeah. That idea of romantic that's been asked before with me, or not romantic, but the word was poetic. Did I think my work was poetic? I wanted to sort of, in some way, I could say yes, I would agree with that. But in another way, I still feel, or I would almost say it's my way, it's a document. It could be like seen as a very hard document of something too. It's just to what I record. and that's the effect it has. But I feel like I am quite. It's like I almost feel like I'm going from a very factual beginning in some way, like quite a technical starting point, where I want to record something in time. And I note time a lot. I have this logbook of this sort of technical lists of times and locations, and so in some way it's like it's just a sort of factual document, but maybe with the material and with the actual subject matter, it results in something.
Sorry, just one more thing. Just one more kind of thing. It's just the reason I said it was kind of romantic was that every single image that you look at, it's not something that you've gone past and you've just taken it instantly. It feels like when you're looking at an image that you've spent actually time in that space, and it's almost these spaces almost become these intimate spaces that you're suggesting, not just the viewer kind of looking at it, but for you, they become almost these quite
Yeah, there is, and I think.
Is that what you do though? All your the photographs that you take, is it spaces that you actually kind of spend time in? So it's not. Am I making any sense?
Yeah, no, you are. For a large part of it, yes. What was I going to say? I've lost my trail of thought now.
Spending time in the spaces before you photograph them.
Yeah.
I mean, for just while you think, for me, it's also back to what you were talking about at the beginning. There needs to be a physical space to contain these ideas, but there also needs to be a temporal space, like you say, in order to pay enough attention to in order to document it.
Yeah, and I think there is a part of me that likes this idea that the images in some way are kind of more contemplative or meditative in some way. On the opening night, I had this projector in a studio on its own, and I wanted it there on its own in a quiet space that someone could enter and sit down and reflect on that. So there is this idea of slowing down that is present, which may be what you mean by spending a lot of time or looking. I think that goes kind of, it's in the same thing. But yeah, also going back to this idea of the architecture, that was, I was very, with all the architecture here, it really did, I was so aware of the forms and shapes and patterns that were occurring in the building that I wanted to be fed into the work. So yeah, going back to that a little bit, but yeah.
Hi.
Hello.
I was just kind of looking at photography and thinking you have this kind of really lovely process of kind of chasing shadows, and shadows caused by natural light. And I was wondering how synthetic light plays in your work, if at all, and if that's something you've explored at all.
It hasn't really. I'm trying to think. For instance, with this side projection series here, I was photographing things at night where there is lamps, be it on the street or inside. But actually, I have stuck quite more to the natural light, the changes that occur naturally.
I think that's really nice. It's nice, and you've got a very pure kind of process in that regard. And you almost have kind of mechanical, man-made things capturing something very kind of ethereal, innocuous and natural. And I was just wondering, if it, I guess, kind of interested you using something machine-based to capture something man-made in terms of man-made light, and what that effect would be.
To use like
like a
artificial
man-made,
lights.
yeah, I guess artificial light together with like a man-made machine almost. It
Yes.
might be interesting, but I think it's perfectly interesting already.
I have to say, I suppose when I have ventured into using sort of artificial lights, man-made lights, it's when it mixes with the daylight.
Yeah.
That that's quite amazing. The colour shifts between those two when the camera again can pick up the daylight against the fluorescent light.
And does that happen to be like man-made light that's already there, some kind of light that happens to be on?
Yeah, I haven't really sort of
It's
constructed
not
very
contrived
much.
or planned in any way. No.
No.
Okay, thanks.
No.
Hi.
Hello.
The work seems to be very kind of concerned with slowing down time, and I don't think it's the right word, but I can't think of any other word for it. But there seems to be a kind of a sentimental side, at least for me, which I connect with a kind of a mourning for stopping time. Is there anything to do with a sense of stopping time and therefore stopping biological kind of aging that is a connection between the work and I don't know, getting older or kind of preserving life? Is there a connection at all there?
Yes, I would say so. I am very much aware of things passing and things being over and things being lost. So yes, I would say that there is, it sounds maybe a bit corny to use, but this idea, the life and the death of something.
Yeah.
And yeah, it is certainly present.
I can see that.
Great. I'd like to just make one further observation on what's been a really interesting conversation. And it does pick up on something that Alex, Karen, and I had talked about previously, which somehow has kind of slipped through, although it has been touched upon in many different ways. And that's the way, in many of the works, in many of the Polaroid pieces, and not just through the fragmentation or fracture of those as different spaces retained within a single image, is an idea of light itself becoming an object. And again, this maybe picks up back to the propositions or the ideas of surfaces and architecture that were brought up in relation to the work. And that to me seems an important thing just to throw in to this context. And in a way, having listened to Alex and Karen talk, the best way that I can kind of further place that is actually the way that Alex first described her relationship to photography and the camera, which she described, if I remember correctly, as being drawn to that as a medium, because implicit within the medium is the idea of an actuality or reality, and that. So the basis of the work is drawn from the physical world, be that light or be that structures. So therefore, the idea of light becoming objects within that, for me, is interesting, because a leading principle of photography is photographing something, is photographing an object. And in this way, Alex seems to me to have removed the objects, but found another way of retaining or redescribing an object. So kind of restructuring that thought. The other thing for me, again, kind of stepping outside and perhaps making connections that aren't fundamentally relevant. And again, I think for me it's triggered by what's happened with this rotation, or the cut-up of those images, retained within the Polaroids. So that idea of fragmentation, coupled with an idea of objects, seems to lend itself to something that maybe was a consideration of Cubist proposition. And the interesting thing for me there is that the Cubism is a painting, so it's two-dimensional surfaces, but trying to deal with a three-dimensional reality or actuality of the world. And the idea of breaking or fracturing that picture plane, not in terms of a direct representation, but in terms to simultaneously represent different aspects or different facets of an object. And that was very much its agenda, and that seems somehow to be retained within these works that Alex has made. So that's a kind of final thing to throw in.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
So if we're happy, we can leave it. Yeah.
If everyone else is.
Great. Excellent. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for coming. Yeah.
Seeing your work for quite some time and develop over the last many years, I wonder, or when I look at it, you always remind me to stop and look at these moments and look at these shadows and these like slow times of light and things. When you're creating it, are you thinking, you know, that old kind of stop to smell the roses kind of, do you ever think of how your viewer may then go on to look at light and look at shadow the way that you've really changed my perception and the way I would say I slow down on a daily basis because of your works that I've seen?
I suppose it is wanting maybe in some respect to highlight something, but yeah, I mean it comes from my own personal want to explore something, but if it happens that then impacts, like you then also can see the colour shifts and you start to notice something, then that's great.
You've definitely shared your love of shadows or turned it on to me as well. That's great.
Yeah.
Second to that. Thank you. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you.